Recently, I heard a journalist who has written a lot about the genocide in Rwanda talk about how in our culture and in our media, when we talk about situations like Congo, typically we like to throw around words like unthinkable or unspeakable. And his point was, one, that when we do that, we posture like we've dealt with something when in fact we haven't dealt with it at all. And secondly, as journalists, and I would certainly say by extension activists, what's our job if not to think and speak? So to begin, when we talk about sexual violence in Congo, rape, as horrible as it is almost a soft word for the sort of systematic torture that's taking place. Women are gang raped, they're held as sexual slaves for months or even years at a time. Women are attacked in a way that is systematically designed to destroy their ability to reproduce. There are some stories that I find actually conspicuously absent from the dialogue on Congo, even in activist circles, but stories that I heard over and over again when I was in Congo, particularly related to Congolese men. Militias will show up at a family's home and hold a gun to a man's head and command him to rape his own child or rape his mother. And as I heard the story over and over, Congolese men refuse. They would rather take a bullet in the head than violate their own child or mother. One sister in particular told me the story of a militia coming and commanding her brother to rape her. He refused, so he was killed immediately, so they raped her. Then they commanded that her husband rape her daughter, and when he refused, they raped him, and he died from the injuries from that attack. But there's really no story that raises this question of what is unthinkable or unspeakable more than Generosa's story. When I came back from Congo the first time, I told her story twice, and I didn't tell it again for a year and a half. But today I'd like to share the full story. You've heard a part of it, in that the militia came, they demanded money, they killed her husband, they cut off her leg, they cut the leg into pieces, commanded that her children eat the leg, and when her child refused, the child was killed. But one of the remarkable things is that that's not even the worst thing that happened that day, because they went next door, cut out the eyes, cut off the nose and mouth of her next door neighbor, Mama Annie, who was 8 months pregnant. They cut out the pregnancy and she died in the hospital 4 days later. There was a wedding happening next door as well. They raped and murdered the bride, and then they burned 47 wedding guests alive. When I asked the UN about verifying this report, I was told, in fact, attacks where 50 people were killed in one day were actually common in that village of Kanyola throughout that year. I actually went and visited the village of Kanyola on my first trip to Congo, and at the time, attacks were happening about twice a week. People were being burned alive or murdered, mostly by the FDLR. After I left, I heard more reports of attacks where people were being killed, 17 at a time, abducted 20 at a time. So I went back in 2008, and just before I went back this year, in 2010, I was talking with a staff member from the Enough Project who mentioned he had also been to the village of Kanyola, which caught my attention because it's really not secure and not a place people go often. So I asked what he was doing there, and he went to visit a gold mine. So the light bulb went on. I decided to visit that mine. So that's the footage actually that you just saw of the gold mine there was in the village of Kanyola. And when I went to that mine, as you walk to the mine, you have to pass through this sort of valley that's agricultural. A year and a half ago, it was a village. There were huts there. They've all been burned to the ground. And in fact, just in one attack, the Interahamwe came and beheaded 29 people. That site sits right next to the gold mine. So when we're talking about conflict minerals, this is the sort of thing that we're talking about in terms of attempt to control territory and control populations with terror. So I think it's very tricky. Often Congo is referred to as post-conflict. And while that may technically be true, my experience in talking with Congolese people, the sort of attacks that happen, the way women are constantly under threat of rape, under threat of mass murder, in many ways, it does not seem as though things have changed. But I will say that I think one thing has changed since 2005 when I started doing my work for women in the Congo, and that is here. I came to DC in 2006 often to support Senator Brownback's bill related to Congo. And at the time, I have to admit, I sort of felt like I was faking it when I was talking with legislative aides about the movement that was growing for Congo. At that time, we had runs in 10 states and 4 countries, which was true, although many of them were one person. Like, for instance, the first New York run for Congo Women, when we had 40 people registered, but 1 person showed up because of the terrible weather that day. But what's happened since then is a real movement has started to grow. And I can sort of admit that I was faking it at the time because I am not faking it now. We are not faking it now. There is a groundswell of support in this country for Congo. Run for Congo Women, for instance, the second year we did the New York run, someone who hadn't showed up that first year turned into the New York run organizer. We had 100 people the next year, 300 the year after that. As Rory mentioned, now we've had more than 4,000 people participate in a run for Congo Women. We have technically raised $650,000. There are all kinds of offshoot groups like Yoga for Congo Women and Healing for Congo Women, certainly V-Day, groups like Friends of Congo, and actually my personal dream come true, the Raise Hope for Congo campaign. And then in this fall, I ended up getting a phone call, and a couple weeks later, I found myself on the Oprah Winfrey Show, tag teaming it with Nick Kristof from the New York Times, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, Ben Affleck, and we raised $6 million in a week. We doubled the size of Women for Women's Congo program and raised Women for Women International's annual sponsorships to 42,000. That's significant because what we're talking about are tens of thousands of American families who have invited Congolese women into their families. And if people I meet just on a regular basis are any indication, by extension, Oprah Winfrey's viewing audience of millions not only have been educated, but there's sort of a profound cultural shift that I believe is happening in this country in terms of the way that we relate to these issues. I saw a documentary on PBS a couple weeks ago called Worse Than War, which was covering the sort of history of genocide. And the person who put together that piece argued that in order to stop genocide and mass atrocity, you have to do 2 things. One, you have to change the cost-benefit analysis for the people perpetrating the atrocities. And second, you need to get people here to view those living through it as though it's happening to their own families. So to me, sponsorship is a powerful tool for social change. And as much as it may seem a little bit cheesy or touchy-feely for us to refer to women that we sponsor as our sisters, in fact, I think it's quite significant because early on, 5.5 years ago when I talked with press, I heard from journalists who said basically that Congo wasn't getting any coverage because they didn't believe that the American people had room in their psyche for more than one international conflict, that when we look at Africa, we sort of think of it as a pit of despair and shut down. So what I've discovered is that when people have an emotional link to the conflict, if they feel personally connected to it, their set point changes in terms of what they're willing to hear. American women are perfectly willing to think and imagine. When they hear what's happening in Congo, they look at their own children and imagine it was happening to them. So in many ways, I believe that we're sort of changing the fabric of American family life. Many American women have cried themselves to sleep thinking about what's happening in Congo. But then they turn around and invest every shred of spare time, every extra penny that they have, trying to do something to stop the violence in Congo. one woman, Tracy, in Texas, trained in 110-degree heat all summer to do her lone run. Another family in California that I know of, a single mom and her teenage son, live on $1,200 a month, and they still sponsor a woman in Congo. Tracy, our Chicago Run organizer, recently was talking with her 6-year-old daughter and gave her this little form where she's supposed to fill out things that make her happy, and the #1 thing on her list was helping the Congo. So I believe that there's sort of a cultural shift happening there, and I also think when we're talking about a demographic such as the Oprah demographic, this is actually a very sophisticated group, and they completely get what this is about. The number one questions that I'm asked are, we can help individual women, but how do we stop the violence for good? And who's making money off of all of this? So the core issue does not escape them. I've personally spent the last 5.5 years doing absolutely everything I can to get American women to bond emotionally with Congolese, to feel that they are their families. And I'm very happy to be here on behalf of tens of thousands, if not millions, of Americans who feel that way and are urging Congress to do more, to do the thing that we can't do, which is change the cost-benefit analysis for those perpetrating this. And I would just take you back to Jenna Rose, who you met in the video. The kind of torture that she lived through is by design meant to crush the human spirit. I mean, the militia fed her body to her children. When I asked her if she would come out and do the run, she didn't hesitate. I mean, not only did she show up, but she showed up, as you saw, in a red suit and pink pearls. It was painful for her to run. She was only on one leg. She had to run barefoot. The crutches that she had were cutting into her arms in a way that was painful for her. And I asked why she did it. And she said, because if I can run on only one leg, then everyone will know that they can do something to help. And so I think in many ways, all we really need to do is follow the lead of women like Jenna Rose and use whatever power we have at our disposal to end the violence once and for all. Thank you.